Well, Dorothy Cotton, it's good to see you.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to have the introduction and to spend some time in front of another camera.
Well, the first time we met, and the last time we met was in 2011 at the women's luncheon for the unveiling of the MLK Memorial. And I was walking by, and you saw me, and you were, come here, come here, come here. And then you gave me a hug. You said you enjoyed watching me on television. I said I appreciate that, and had always wanted to meet you as
I
well.
must have forgotten that.
It's all good. It's all good. We even took a photo.
Yeah.
We even took a photo, so it's all good. So,
Yeah.
so how are things for you these days?
Well, that's a question that requires such a general answer because it's such a general question. How are things with you? Things are stirred, they are changing, they are evolving, and there are painful things happening. They're like my very, very, very special friend Wyatt T. Walker died this past week, and actually Wyatt is a major part of the reason that I even met Martin. Uh, and did you know that Wyatt
Mm-hmm.
Walker died?
Mm-hmm.
And that's very, very. I was, as my sister would say, all shook up, um, because that was so. That is so special, because he's the Whitey Walker. That is very, very special, because he's actually the reason that I met Martin Luther King. Now I might have met him anyway. How do we know? What's going to happen? But what did happen was I was a member of the Young Women's Parish Club. At that time, I was a young woman. and, I, we were serving lunch at the church I was active in Petersburg, Virginia. That was my home base at the time. And when I decided that I was going to be a member of the Young Women's Parish Club, then we took the responsibility of serving dinner to our very fancy. Uh, I'm not sure what to call it, but he was a main speaker and visitor for our occasion that weekend. And so I'll stop going on here, but it was just very, very important uh, for me eventually, as I started to think about the speech that Martin actually gave at the church, and the Young Women's Parish Club serving the meal for the occasion, and I felt kind of a connection even then while we were serving the dinner uh, at Reverend Walker's house at the parsonage. And so from that day on, I felt like I discovered a brother I had never had.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I met Martin Luther King. And you ever meet somebody and you just felt you kind of connect
Mm-hmm.
pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened while we're in the parsonage, where Wyatt's home, uh, and we were the Young Women's Parish Club was serving the meal, and I think that I'm not sure I should say this, but I think I'll say it anyway, because it was a group of us serving this big platters of food, and And then I heard comments about the meal and the legs and all these rather flirtatious comments about as we were walking around the table with these big platters of food. But this little preacher, and he was a little preacher in one sense, in another sense, he was one of the biggest we ever had, if you can know what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
that. But Martin was sitting at the table, and I told him after I had known him for years. Uh, yeah, I heard Coretta say, that's his wife, that he was a flirt. But she was playing, she thought she was playing, but it was a flirt. when I got through and went to some classes that Martin was directing, and it was absolutely wonderful that I became the education director because I was just fascinated by all that biblical stuff. And my dad didn't care anything about the Bible. He thought he knew everything. My dad thought he didn't need his four daughters to learn all that kind of stuff because our mother of four daughters, our mother had died when, and my dad was left with four little toddlers.
Mm.
And so I think he was happy to meet um, somebody and we like that. And we were, and I'll stop rambling on here. But it was very interesting that I'm walking around the table, the Young Women's Parish Club. Now, when I say we were walking around the table, we were indeed serving the dinner. And the Young Women's Parish Club did dinners quite regularly. And that's enough about that, I think. But because now we're in the residence, uh, and the place from which the parish club did its work in entertaining.
What was it about getting involved in the movement, getting involved in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that was so important to you? Why did
What
you
was so
want?
important to it?
Yes, in your words.
I couldn't have sat in this room. You didn't know that I couldn't have sat in this room here. And so when we were still at that time struggling against the segregation,
Mm-hmm.
um, it was very, very easy to pick your target. I don't mean that in a violent sense,
Mm-hmm.
but just the fact that we knew there were some things we had to change. And one thing we had to change was changing this system of segregation because my dad was in the Navy, and you'll see a picture in this book
Mm-hmm.
of my dad in his Navy uniform. And he had been, we were four toddlers. My mother had died when my dad was left with these four
Mm-hmm.
toddlers. And but they knew, my dad knew, and even Wyatt Reverend Walker knew that some serious changes had to occur. Uh, and even at that time, though, as someone said, Martin was, he was kind of a flirt. This was kind of a side comment. And when we were walking around the table now, it was a big table, like 12 people, walking around the table with these big platters of food, um, I could hear these flirtatious comments that Martin was making. And, uh, and that was okay because we were all by that time giggling and acting silly. And but we had this big table and these big platters of chicken and Martin loved every minute of it. So that's what was going on at the preacher's house. I mean Wyatt T. Walker's house. You know Wyatt died last week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So when you began to when the work began, and then you began to work on various things in the movement, were you ever scared?
Scared.
Were you ever scared that you would lose your life?
But asking that question of me at this point is I want to use the word scared, frightened, and maybe some other words, but because we were already involved in working for change. And I know that Martin would say, and Wyatt would say, but especially I would like to quote Martin at this time. He'd say things like, no, nobody can ride your back. Now, we were in a discussion at this point because Martin stayed with us, I think, 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no, nobody can ride your back if your back's not bent. Guess where I got the title of my book?
If your back's not bent.
If your back's not bent, right. And so I then was discussing that probably for the next week. If your back's not bent, what do you mean by that? And that's, of course, what we all meant. You were too young to remember when you couldn't go in the front door, you had to go in the back door.
Hmm.
I shouldn't put it on you and point it, but that was it was an important, oh gosh, not important to the larger uh, company, but we had to follow that rule
Hmm.
and go to back doors. And Martin at some point said, "Nobody can ride your back if your back's not bent." And that's my dad. You just passed. He was in the Navy,
Hmm.
and but one thing about I jump around here. You can put it in places that you want it. Nobody can ride your back if your back's not bent.
So here's what's interesting. What's interesting is I think when people think back, when they think about the Black Freedom Movement, the Civil Rights Movement, they think about folks today in terms of their age. And they really don't understand that these were a group of folks who were 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. I mean, if you were 25, you were old head. And that's really, I think, what is remarkable and powerful, just how
How
young,
young people were.
but also how committed and focused
Hmm.
they were.
Yeah, the bug had bit, uh, or bitten, whatever the right terminology is. And we knew that something was radically wrong. We knew that we were going to be working to change it. And I could name things and places where where the segregation was very, very painful. I can even give you an example from my dad, who was in the Navy,
Hmm.
and at some point while we were youngsters, and my dad is raising four children by himself. My mother had died. I may have four pictures in there, yeah. And my mother had died, leaving, and my dad had four toddlers. And it was very, very interesting that when I could see that actually, I'm trying to think how much I want to say about this. Uh, but the guys were guys. If they wanted to flirt, they flirted. And not you,
I understand.
not you, and not him. Anyway, it's but seriously, and I'm serious about that too. Very serious about that,
Hmm.
um, because we had to do some stupid things and some things that would maintain the segregation system pattern. You must have been a young teenager during those days. I don't know.
Wasn't born.
Oh,
I was born November 14th, 1968.
oh my goodness, you were a toddler. Yeah, but I remember in the parish house. This is my preacher, Reverend Walker. I remember serving the dinner, in the parsonage, and I remember Wyatt. Uh, Actually, I go back to a quote that something that Martin said, and and somebody said, "You sure were staring at those girls' legs," and that it was just he was just playing in a flirty kind of way, and they had a good time, doing it. But I'm walking around with a big platter of chicken in my and Martin loved fried chicken. I'm walking around with this big plate of chicken around this big table. So, Martin is our guest, and so you show off for your visiting preacher. It's so we were just serving dinner, but at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that if I think that the visitor is a little flirty, um, it's he's a little flirty. And and that was okay. So if you've got 6 or 7 women walking around the table with all this food, um, they just do it. We didn't think that was any big deal. Preachers love fried chicken in those days. You're not
You,
a preacher, are you?
no, I'm not. But my wife is.
Oh.
But I still like fried chicken. You have a chapter in your book called Dr. King and the Team of Wild Horses.
Mhm. Yeah, he
Why
said,
why were y'all wild horses?
uh, he just that's just some terminology. He had a wonderful sense of humor. Martin did, wonderful sense of humor, and his when folks started talking about his team of wild horses. Uh, by that time, we probably were because we now had been given major responsibility.
Hmm.
And I'm director of education. I already had a master's degree from Boston University by the time I'm serving chicken around that table. and 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 that really was it was okay, but we really had to accept what we were doing. I don't know why we knew how important Martin was in the our church community,
And,
but
and in fact, you write in your book, Martin was clearly our leader. He was the grand patriarch,
yeah.
and we all had great respect for him.
Hmm.
We saw in him an ability to decipher and analyze a concern or a problem in a way no one else on the team would or could.
Hmm. I can't say it better. And the I'm tempted to flash forward to the time he was taken away from us. That he was somebody decided that they were gonna take him out. That's a phrase they used to use
Hmm.
before people used to use shoes. uh, but that's what they decided. It's the first somebody looked and said, he's looking at that girl's high heel shoes, and but I and here I'm walking around with this place. Just see it in a living room,
Right.
in a dining room, and see people walking around. And I remember having this big plate of chicken.
Hmm.
This is the day I met Martin Luther King.
Hmm.
But I was a poet. I loved what I was doing. I loved poetry. I had gotten my master's degree from Boston University, and it just back and forth all the time.
Hmm.
And I was married at the time, but I didn't let that stop me from doing what I felt so strongly uh, at that time. I didn't let it stop me because I couldn't. It seems like I just couldn't help. I was because I was also training in nonviolent
Hmm.
education, and Martin was helping me and pushing me to do that. He thought I was a really good teacher, and I was, and still am. And so I would start to run small classes and discussing this nonviolence thing
Hmm.
stuff, and and that and that was fine. So that terminology, a team of wild horses, that just kind of emerged out of the work we were doing. That was at a time when we could not use the same water fountain as you. I mean, not as you. I,
Hmm.
I
I
couldn't use
understand.
it either. Yeah, we couldn't use the same library, except the end of the week. We could use the library one day a week. My dad, there's a picture in there. My dad in his Navy uniform. Did you see it?
Hmm.
And my dad was left with 4 toddlers,
Hmm.
and my mother had died, and was left with 4 children, 4 girls, and that was, in a strange sense, that was. I almost said that no, it was not okay because my mother died. She just died. I don't know. Frankly, I don't know what she died from. And it occurred to me right at this moment that I don't know why. I don't know why she died. I don't know what she died from.
Hmm.
If somebody asked me what she died from, I'm not sure what I would say about that.
Mm.
But we can put that aside for a moment. And I think that the fact that she was, I think it was in childbirth. The women didn't know how to take care of themselves and whatever they needed to do. That somebody said that back to me one day when I said that. I'm not quite sure what it was that really took her away, our mother.
Well, let me ask you this here. So I interviewed Juanita Abernathy.
Hmm?
I interviewed Juanita Abernathy, and I asked her about folks who believe that Ralph Abernathy was jealous of Dr. King. And you wrote about it. You talked about how close they were. She said that Dr. King's that Daddy King once said that Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy were probably closer than King was to his own brother.
Mm.
Talk about just that their unique relationship.
Well, I really would not do justice to their unique relationship. I wouldn't do justice because where two guys went, the girls didn't go. I didn't go where those two boys went. And I'm saying boys because I want to emphasize the fact that they didn't. That they somehow they became so I don't know, like like twin brothers or something. And because some people wanted to stick something else on to it, but Martin was a ladies' man. I can tell you that. And I remember his looking when some woman was passing down a corridor in the church, and Martin couldn't keep his chair because he was twisting to follow those high heel shoes. And I talked about that one day, and 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 people just sort of giggled at me because I said Martin was following the high heel shoes. That's exactly what I said, and he was on high heel shoes. Um, so it's like how can we describe flirting or somebody exciting about whatever that is for all of us that if we get caught up with somebody what do you do? What I don't know what you do. I know what I do, and so I don't think you can generalize that. So I don't even want to generalize it, if you want to. But they were like brothers. That's what I called it, just brothers. It was people. There were people like Rosa Parks,
Hmm.
who Rosa, when they asked her to move to the back of the bus, and she said the white guy can move to the back of the bus, and then she was just a seamstress downtown,
Hmm.
but she was not going to move to the back of the bus. And that started something that I think it shocks us still today, that she was not going to let the other folks tell her that she couldn't sit in the front of the bus. She was not going to let any one of them tell her that.
I, I, I,
And they didn't tell her, but when they would didn't when she wouldn't move, that's when they arrested her.
Let me ask you this. You talked about, you talked about these wild horses, and you had these really
No, that was
smart,
Martin's
his
terminology.
term, called them wild horses, individuals who were very smart, who were very aggressive. You talked about how they all wanted to impress him, all the men wanted to impress him. But he once asked Andrew Young why you didn't say much in the meetings. And you write in your book, Andrew Young said, she has no need to compete with these guys. She's comfortable and confident in her work with the training program.
She who was
You.
I talking about?
He was talking about you.
I've forgotten. Oh well,
He,
I
he
was
said you had
director.
no need to compete with the
I
guys.
know.
Let them
Yeah,
compete.
I was director of training. I already had a master's degree in training from Boston University, and that was my training. That was, and I did it, and I was good at it. And Martin saw that I was good at it.
When you think about the other individuals who you were working with, um, he doesn't get much attention, but
He who
James Bevel,
say who you.
James Bevel, and you write about him, and just
Wow,
how amazing of a strategist he was.
it was indeed, and there's something about personality as I think about it now. It's interesting. No, nobody, yeah, push me to think about it the way your question does. But no, James Bevel was unique in the way he would describe things, for example, and the way he would describe things would somehow it could make a room full of people get quiet because of the language he would use, the language that Bevel would use. And he was really, this makes me want to go find Bevel, see where he is.
Unfortunately, he passed away.
Hmm.
He passed away several years ago.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. I forgot. Yep. Um, and he and Diane Nash. But anyway, all that's really kind of an aside, except Bevel was a smart guy.
Talk about Diane Nash, because again, another strong woman, and women did not get the respect they should have earned, should have gotten as a result of the civil rights movement. Because women were the backbone of the movement.
You can say that. I was director of education. I'm not saying that as to brag about it, but and I don't know. Maybe it was something flirtatious in that. I don't know, but I do know that I already had a master's degree from Boston University, and and Martin that wanted me to do the training because he had come to my classes. I could have 50 or 60 people and work with them for a week or more.
And
And
talk.
Martin would come in. I would tell you that phrase. That's where I got a title. If your back's not bent, because Martin came in one day and he made one of his speeches and said, a brief speech, but he said nobody can ride your back if your back's not bent.
Can you just talk about the education piece? Because I believe one of the most under discussed aspects of the civil rights movement was the tremendous training,
Yeah.
the classes, the training. Folks just didn't run out there
No
and participate in a march or participate in
No
something.
way. No
So whether
way.
it was SLC, whether it was CORE, whether it was SNCC, it was intensive training.
We went out there and we did it, and and when the weather got warm, you can see some pictures, some places where there were crowds out there. People, African American people, were so glad to be confronting this stupid thing that kept us in the back of the bus. Not just the back of the bus, but the back of everything.
Mm-hmm.
The back of everything. It was very interesting, and Bevel he was good with the language, and one guy you'll see my hand helping some guy learn to do cursive writing, because if you didn't do cursive writing, they would tell you you were not eligible to vote, and you did that makes sense. I didn't know if you ever
Didn't know that.
that word, yeah. But James Bevel and Diane Nash, they were the people who were pushing for that. But I had to take people in my workshop and help them understand. Are we going to do cursive writing this week? But of course, I wouldn't do that this week. No, you write like everybody else writes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it happened that people understood things were changing. My dad's a classic example. My dad was in the Navy, and his four toddlers, uh, we went to stay with my dad's sister, and he knew that he couldn't take care of us if he's in the Navy. Couldn't take care of four little children, and so it, it was sort of messy in the sense that there was no blueprint laid out, except that blueprint was evolving,
Mm-hmm.
so that we knew that we had to do something to live into those regulations, and we were. Now that I say it, I think it was stupid that we did that. That we got okay. All right. We'll do the cursive writing. And there's a picture in that book somewhere of me doing cursive writing. Have you seen it?
I went past it.
Yeah, because if we didn't do the cursive writing, the other folks would tell us that we can't vote.
When you think back to all of the times you spent with Dr. King, when you think back to the conversations, public conversations, private conversations, staff retreats, meetings, what's the most impressive? What stands out about who he was as a person?
Who he was as a person was a silly playboy. Yes, he was. He really was. we were walking down, I forget the street where, there was always a place where African American folk could have hung in the pool rooms,
Right.
in the swimming pool if we had one, and but it was okay. But what I remember that really moved me more than anything else at that time, maybe not more than anything else, but we had to use the public library one day a week. African American folk could only use the public library one day a week. You will see a picture of me holding a guy's hand to helping him do cursive writing. Because if he couldn't do cursive writing, he couldn't vote because they're not going to let you get up there and do this, what he called a square. So I've almost forgotten what we used to call it. But because we had to live into the status quo. But we had to do that. There's a picture in there of me holding the guy's hand. Have you seen it?
Yep.
And well, that was the reason he had to do cursive writing in order to vote. But the thing is, the powers that be, did not want us to vote, and they would do anything to keep black folk from voting.
You called him a silly playboy, meaning Dr. King. When I talked to Andrew Young, he talks about how he would crack jokes on everybody.
Martin?
He was the one who always kept folks in stitches.
Who Andrew?
Yes, he said that's what Andrew Young said about Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh yeah,
his sense of humor.
He was. He was. He would laugh. He could sit on the back seat of a car, and everybody else was laughing. And thanks to Martin, everybody else was laughing. It was like he was doing what he was doing. He was doing the work of breaking down that system, but somehow it fed the movement, the energy that we needed for the movement. And I don't know, the creator must have given him that because it was like a talent that he could use and to break down this system. And he used it. I don't know if anybody, maybe in some big prayer one night, I don't know, but he used that talent he could sit on the back seat of a car, and Andy could be driving, and I could be on the front seat, and but he was going to make sure that everybody in the car was laughing, and but he was a great jokester. And I remember that we were walking down the street, and I don't know if you know neighborhoods where all the African American folk, or most of them, were in a lot of them were in the pool hall, because that was the only place my dad could go.
Right.
And so they're all in the pool hall, and Martin sort of proved that he wanted to go and shoot some pool.
And now there's that famous photo of him in Chicago playing pool.
He did go in there. He did go in there and he did shoot some pool. And I remember going in there yelling at him. Now I can't imagine yelling at him now because the world.
You were yelling at him why? Because he was playing pool? Didn't want him seen playing pool?
Because it was time for him to be. I said, Martin, do you know it's time for you to be in the church? Yeah.
But he wanted to get a little pool game in.
Yeah, he did. And he got it in. But except that we had to go in and stop it.
Also,
that's all he wanted to do was play a little pool. But when he got in the in the pool room. Oh, this makes me cry. You wouldn't believe where his messages came from. He said it was almost like he wanted to talk to the guys in the pool hall, but I didn't know that. All I'm saying is, it's time for you to be in church. Time for you to be in church. And he would get there, and when he would get there, he did. If I'm gonna make a speech, I don't want anybody to say anything to me. um, if I'm gonna go make a speech somewhere, I need quiet and all of that. You know, all the stuff some people go through when they are planning for a speech. But we were like, he was like a block or two from the church, and I had to rush him because it was time for him to be in the church. But there was a lot of singing and stuff like that. I don't know.
But in the pool hall,
Yeah,
he wanted to talk to those brothers who were in there.
you can say that. That sounds very elegant. That sounds very nice. He wanted to shoot some food. I know what he wanted to do. He wanted to shoot some food.
When you reflect on, my goodness, Birmingham, Selma, of course, Albany, Georgia, Jim Lawson and the Nashville movement, North Carolina A&T, and
Yeah.
and those sit-ins. When I read, it seems as if nothing ever stopped. That from Montgomery, December 1st, 1955, all the way through his assassination, it was just nonstop.
We couldn't stop, and we didn't think about stopping. We didn't. It was almost like we didn't care. Now that's a little overstated, but Martin was. We were not going to let our energy die down. And Martin knew that too. Even if he's in the pool hall, he was not going to let it die down. So and that was fine with us because wherever Martin would go, I don't know, the energy would just emerge, and he's ready to roll. He would start talking about what we needed to talk about wherever he was. But if he's in a big church, a big cathedral, um, Martin would he would get to to the podium, the what you call that thing, stand
Pulpit.
pulpit, yeah, right. And it was like God must have given him something to say because he said it. He spoke about what needed to happen, and it happened. He spoke about what needed to happen because what uh, it was like. The title of my book is really true. If your back's not bent, nobody can ride your back if your back's not bent.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and what we, of course, and what Martin meant by that, nobody can ride your back. If you feel like you're nobody, is I guess I hope that meaning comes clear. If you feel like you are nobody, that's how the community will treat you, or the workplace, or the whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you get treated. So our goal was, even though we didn't talk about it a lot, but we wanted people to know, if you are walking around almost saying, "Excuse me for living," uh, if that's how you feel about yourself, that's how people are going to treat you.
I want to talk about Memphis.
Mm,
And you write about what you call the last plane ride.
mm.
Uh,
I
on,
forgot what I wrote about that.
well, on April 3rd, 1968, you talk about being on the plane, and they said they had to delay the plane ride to check the plane because Dr. King and some of his staff were on. There was a bomb threat. And you say, we scurried off the plane in a strange kind of quiet. I'm embarrassed to say that I stepped on Martin's foot as we did so. He was
I didn't know I did that. I didn't know I said that.
You said he was walking so slowly and deliberately, and I was moving energetically. But as you writing this, you're talking about how it was just different. It felt different. Folks were quiet. Um,
Some things are not for us to know, is what comes to me. And I don't know that I want to spend a lot of time trying to analyze that, because I think that there's another I don't know, a string of energy operating, and we don't know everything.
hmm
I really believe that, because a lot of things that happened, we didn't know they were going to happen. We didn't know what they were at all sometimes. So the fact that we had to go ahead and do what we had to do. Uh, my dad, there's a picture of my dad in his Navy uniform in there. I don't know if you've seen it in my book there. Uh, he couldn't, my dad, till this day, and I feel sad about it, he couldn't uh, do anything uh, while he was in his Navy uniform, because they didn't care. All four of us had to go stay with my dad's sister for a while till he came back out of the Navy. And I said, why didn't you tell them you were in the Navy? He said, I did tell them. But the point was, it didn't matter. Um, but have you seen the picture of my dad in the Navy
hmm
uniform? Yeah, he had to do what he felt he needed to do. And I think, and we can't second guess people and say, well, you should have, you might have. Yeah, well, you that's what he did. It was a different time.
when y'all got to the Lorraine Motel, um, he was in room 306. You were in 307. Rap Abernathy was in 308. That's what you write in your book. And on that night, y'all had a meeting with some of the young men who had disrupted the earlier march. And your job was to meet with them to make sure that in the next march there was not going to be any problems.
Mhm.
So when he spoke at Mason Temple, you weren't at Mason Temple. He left y'all to still keep the meeting going.
I haven't read it. I haven't read my book. No, it's. I mean, I wrote every line of it,
hmm
and at that time, that's what the focus was for some reason. Uh, but it's like the things that we needed to do, we did them. It's like people saying you can't come eat here, and and you realize that, well, we will not eat there. They'll blow us all away. You do what you have to do. I'm gonna do what I. Civil rights movement was a singing movement.
Oh yeah, well, I tell people all the time. If you don't understand the power of music, the freedom songs and the freedom singers, I said you don't realize
Yeah,
that was a song for everything.
there was a song for everything. Yeah,
That got folks through.
yeah.
When he returned from Mason Temple, did you have any conversations with the folks who were with him about that unbelievable, powerful speech? Were any conversations that night when he got back? Because when we reflect on it now,
You're missing something. You know what you're missing?
what's that?
When he returned, did you have any conversations about what he was missing? He wasn't missing anything, because I never left him. Andy never left him. Ralph never left him. We were always a team. We were always a team. We were. That's not an exaggeration. But we would. I don't know what it was, but we wouldn't have left him. I'm gonna cry.
The last conversation you had with him,
All right.
last conversation, you write it in your book
Yeah.
that it was the
Well,
next
I
day.
was walking down the street not the street, somebody's balcony with a big plate of fried chicken.
And you wrote in your book that it was April 4th.
I don't remember
And the,
days like
I'm gonna walk
whatever the
I'm
day
gonna, I'm gonna walk
was.
you through. It was April 4th,
Mhm.
and you had a meeting in Atlanta. and you had a meeting with Dolores Harmon, and you said, I got to get back to Atlanta. And Dr. King said, no, we need to talk about plans to training in Memphis. And you said, I got to get to Atlanta. He kept telling you, you can get a later plane. And you said, I got to get back to Atlanta. And you said the last words to you were, get a later plane. And you left Memphis that afternoon.
I do remember that I had left, but I also remember that I had a big plate of fried chicken from somebody's house. That in those days people would cook for each other,
Mm-hmm.
and this woman was glad to cook a plate of chicken, and she knew Dr. King was going to eat some of it. Uh, so he really loved eating that fried stuff. So there's nothing to talk about except he loved to eat fried chicken. What is it you would want to know? He, I brought the chicken to that woman, to that house from another house where they actually did stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
You're too young to remember when people would pass food from house to house, and, not because they needed to, it's because they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, serve Dr. King some chicken, you know. So
You were in Atlanta when you found out that he had been killed.
uh, now that's the very very hard part for me
Mm-hmm.
to detail, and so it's I remember somebody. I remember that I had a plate of food that Martin, because he had not had any dinner.
Now that was a previous day, on April 4th. You were in
Well,
Atlanta.
okay, well you're reading, so I got to go read my
It's all
book.
good. It's all good. So April 4th, you're in Atlanta, and Rita Samuels tells you Dr. King shot. Somebody
Yeah,
killed him.
I need to read that again because my recollection is I went to get this plate of chicken, and I don't want to debate about it
Right, right,
until
right. That was April 3rd. That was April 3rd.
yeah.
So this is the next day,
Yeah,
and and you.
I don't remember. I'm gonna go get my copy
It's all
down.
good. Well, no, there's your copy right here.
Yeah,
And so Andrew Young called you, and y'all talked,
yeah,
and you said, "I wish I could have been there with him in that last moment. Talk with him one more time, showing total support for what we were about." And he said, "That's all right." And he was calm, and he was consoling you. And I reflected on what Martin had said to me that morning. Get on a later plane. And you said, Andy and I both had an abiding love for Martin. We love him still. We both still cry sometimes as we remember.
yeah. So yeah.
The closeness, I think, is what a lot of people don't really understand. How close all of you were.
we it was too late to do anything different. We were close. We were like I don't know what it is when you, maybe in the I don't know military or somewhere where people get connected and they stay connected. That's not a good analogy, uh, really, because I remember taking him some food at that woman's house, and when I took the food, and now I got to think about which happened which happened first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the shooting or did I get the food in his hand and you know things like that. Those are not details that I have held on to because I didn't need to. And you're the first one that asked me, you know, about you know that I used to talk about. He was walking down that corridor in the church when
Mm-hmm.
with some staring at that lady's high heel shoes.
Do you still miss him?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Probably always will. What are those pages you are?
You said something I thought was interesting. You wrote, massive numbers of people nationwide and in other countries deify Martin Luther King Jr. But I think now of what Andy said in the phone conversation with me recently. Martin didn't need us to do that, to deify him. He needed us to help him, and we did. He needed us to be friends, and we were.
That's well put. I like that verbiage. I like that language, because it's true. It's true. We were you we were friends. We could throw balls at each other. And then Martin were chasing each other around the bed one night, and Andy was running around the bed and laughing. But it was also fun. It was like, what do you do? And because we didn't know what was going to happen, and if we had known, somebody was going to take him out, we probably would have got off that porch. But you can't predict all that's going to happen. At least you might. We couldn't predict everything that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think we'll always miss him.
Last question, what do you want people to know about your work and why it was so important to the movement?
That's very easy for me. And in one sense, if people will work with it and think about it, um, it's just 4 little words. If your back's not bent. If your back's not bent, which is the title of my book, um, if people know that they don't be have to be made to feel like somebody less than other human beings, if we don't accept that,
Mm-hmm.
if your back's not bent, if we don't accept that, we can move forward. Now we will have to have some good. Right now, we need some good politicians. We just have to keep working at that, having a system that will move us in the direction that we know we need to go. And it's not going to be easy, I don't think, but it also might change.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know until we do it. And I wish I had a photograph of Andy and Martin running around a bed. And you sound like you heard that.
Oh, yeah.
It's running around the bed, and Andy was laughing, and Martin was saying, "I told you." Well, I don't even know what the joke was about. Um, but he was running Andy, chasing Andy around the bed. 'Cause I told you there's something, whatever it was, I don't know. But but and I did the training and none of all the training workshops. And,
Absolutely.
So and that was what I was supposed to do at that time.
With Dorothy Cotton, I appreciate it. Good chatting with you.
Well, I hope that I gave you something that you had.
Oh, yeah. Yes, you did. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.